Magnus Carlsen has just won the Chess World Championship in the rapid time format. Can't say we're exactly surprised, but if you look at the results, it was kind of close, which I guess is surprising. You can see 10 points here for Magnus to clinch the victory, up against second place 9.5. But there are some tactics that go into that to solidify that victory that I'm keen to talk through. Anyway, in this video, we're going to see two matches that really helped Magnus clinch the spot. The first one is up against Pragg, and that was his final round. And then the second match we'll look at is up against Fedoseev, who you can see came second here and was an incredibly important match for Magnus to take the victory. So we're starting off up against Pragg in the final match of the tournament for Magnus. He only needs a draw here to secure his victory, and he's got the white pieces, so I'm sure he's feeling very confident. And I'm going to run through this game quite quickly, and you'll understand why. Again, he's looking for a draw. It's an e4, e5 opening, and after the first few moves, it is completely symmetrical. So it feels like Pragg is already going to be happy with a draw, which is a really interesting situation, because I know if I was in second place, I'd be a bit annoyed if I saw Pragg in this position not playing for a win. But I guess that's just the reality of these chess tournaments. So I'm keen to hear what you all think of that, and yeah, if it's just a reality we can't avoid, because the game continues in this like drawish fashion. We get a bunch of early trades. I imagine this is all theory as well. You can see everything coming off the board. Final piece is developed. The only kind of active play black gets here is with this rook, but you can see that the engine is completely unconvinced. Just not enough time, I guess, to start doubling and creating any serious threats. I forgot to mention, but this is also a counterattack because Magnus is threatening to take the pawn. So first off, this rook is immediately threatening this pawn, which is why the rook slides over. And then we get another counterattack. This one is a bit more tactical in nature because the threat is if this bishop can take, the pawn has to recapture, and then the b pawn is lost. So again, Magnus has to respond to that threat. Pragg now jumps his knight to the center of the board. It's a multi-purpose move. It defends the pawn backwards, but also threatens to take the bishop. So Magnus just retreats his bishop, really clogging up this second rank. I think this kind of neutralizes his rook, because again, this rook feels very active, but the engine just doesn't think there's anything here. Pragg starts advancing his pawns, and Magnus slides his king over, threatening to take the rook, but the rook is defended. And still, I think there's just not too much here for black to do. Magnus decides he wants to have a trade, get rid of this powerful knight. Pragg accepts. We get that exchange. The pawn structure is a bit ruined on this side, but it was already ruined for Pragg as well, so still relatively equal. Pragg decides that this a-pawn could be a bit of a weakness and maybe a target for this bishop, so decides to push it to a6. And Magnus has a little tactic here, which is nice to simplify the game. He moves his bishop to e3 here. Now the king is threatening to take the rook, but it gives up a free pawn. So we get that exchange, but then Magnus slides up himself to the 7th rank. Now he has the active rook, and there's no way to defend this pawn. So we just have a few moves. Black tries to defend. They bring the bishop back, and at this point, they agree to a draw. So you can see it was a relatively uneventful game. I was trying to make a puzzle out of this game for my new website, Chess Blueprints, but there just wasn't really anything there. Just everything was very simple. It was a great example of how to play for a draw if you need one, and definitely worth showing. This is what got Magnus the victory, but I promise the next match is a lot more exciting. There's a lot more tactics, and it's a really unique position. So the next match is against Fedoseev, the one who came second overall. It's later into the tournament. Both these guys were tied for points, so it is a massive match. Winning here would put Magnus in the driver's seat to potentially win the whole tournament, like we saw he did, and he's got the black pieces, so it's a tough pairing for Magnus, but you'll see it's very different to the last game. Magnus starts off with what's called the Nimzo Indian defense, and already, actually, let's play two more moves. You can see this is just an incredibly unbalanced position. We have a bishop traded for a knight. We have doubled pawns. This is how you play if you want to get a win with the black pieces. So one of the main ideas behind the Nimzo Indian is you're making it difficult for white to play e4. That's one of the reasons you trade the bishop for the knight. The knight was allowing white to potentially play e4. But also these doubled pawns can be really awkward. That's why we see Magnus play d6. d5 would claim more of the center, but it would allow white to trade and get rid of that weakness. So that's why you see that relatively passive move. But here comes queen c7 from white. So this is really popular when you're playing up against the Nimzo because, again, it is supporting a potential e4 push. And now it's getting a lot more difficult for Magnus to stop this. We're going to see a few moves from both sides, just kind of gaining space, attacking the center, and eventually the e4 push comes. But again, we still have this weakness with the doubled c-pawns, so Magnus has some room to play with. In this spot, Magnus decides to move his e-pawn for a second time and pushes e5. The idea is because Magnus is kind of lined up with the king here with the queen on the e-file, he wants to open up some files and start attacking, and that's why I see Fedoseev close everything down. But this can make it a bit more difficult to defend that c4 pawn and will allow these knights time to start maneuvering and getting into those weaknesses. So Magnus develops like we're talking about, bringing the knight forward, potentially going to b6, and Fedoseev lashes out with h4. Now this looks super aggressive, looks like his king is going to be really weak if it ever goes kingside, but because the center is still locked, the kings are still relatively safe. We get h6 from Magnus, development here from Fedoseev, and then Magnus shows this concept again of the kings being safe by just moving his king to d8. And again, the reason he can do this is because it's locked down. There's no way for white to immediately attack this king. And I think normally we'd expect like castle's queen side, but I guess even this b file is a bit sketchy because it's open. So Magnus just feels safer with his his king on d8, which looks ridiculous, but you got to trust him. Even decides to go to c7. This white knight is just going everywhere. The game just gets so different in these locked positions. You can afford to make these strange moves. You can afford to move your king to the side of the board or make these multiple knight moves. So that's why we're seeing it from these GMs. Sorry about the camera brightness just changing throughout the video so much as well. I got a new camera, but I've obviously got to figure out how to use it. Anyway, back to the match. We just have a lot of pawn moves coming up. Both sides just gaining space, just trying to improve their position slowly. Now we have some tension in the position. Magnus could decide to close things down even further, but he decides he actually wants to take. So now this g-file is going to be a way for both sides to try and infiltrate each other's positions and get more active and maybe threaten these kings that were looking a bit sketchy hanging out in the middle of the board. So the next few moves are quite natural. We have Magnus swinging his knight over to the square we talked about, putting pressure on these 2 points. White does the same, centralizing their knight. The bishop comes out. They could trade 2 pieces here for the rook, but it's generally not worth it in these spots. This is a really nice queen move for white. It's now defending these 2 weaknesses and also putting some pressure on the knight here. The king is the only defender, so that could be a little bit sketchy. And here comes the interesting maneuver. So again, position is closed. Both players have a lot of time here to improve their position. Magnus is going for this maneuver where he's setting up this f5 break. So again, wants to open up the position a lot more on the king side. White's king realizes this and decides it's time to get out of the way, which seems pretty smart. And here comes the f5 push. So Magnus is looking to open up the board on this side, get more counterplay here. White decides to take. Magnus recaptures with the knight. White decides to leave that tension for a moment, threatening to take this knight with check, which would be a disaster. So that's why we see Magnus now swing the rook up to defend. We get the trade, the bishop attacks the rook, so now the rook has to move, and Magnus slides over to the g-file. Now this is really nice because this rook has just moved off the b-file. These rooks aren't connected anymore, so this rook can't contest like it normally would be able to. But that's why you see the queen come back. Magnus again tries to control the file. We get a bit more shuffling. It's interesting, both guys trying to get into each other's positions. But you can see Magnus has actually developed quite a bit of an advantage here. It's plus 0.9. And you can see why. He's got control of the g-file. There's this nice diagonal he's kind of working with, maybe potential checkmating threats with this position lined up. So Fedoseev's got to figure out a way back into this game. Magnus decides to slide the knight over, done with that pressure over here and maybe looking to get more useful around like this way. So Fedoseev slides the rook back, now threatening, well not threatening, but putting some pressure on that b7 square. We have Magnus continuing that maneuver. Finally, the g-file is contested. We get a trade, and now Magnus slides the rook down, preparing to potentially go over to the g-file. And now we get this f4 move. Very aggressive. White is trying to open up the board because he has the 2 bishops and maybe start attacking the king here. So I mentioned earlier, I've got this website I've been working on. It's an app to help you improve your chess skills. It's really early on at the moment, but I've got some puzzles there, and I've just imported the position from the match we're watching right now. And you can see it's a bit of multiple choice, wondering which move is better. What do you think? I think I'm going to slide the rook over, and that would be correct. And you can see it's got a little explanation here. Basically, we don't want to open up the position like we were talking about with the bishop pair. That could be a disaster. So check out the website if you want to help improve your skills, and let me know what you think of it. So we're back to our game, and I guess if you're wondering if Magnus found the best move, well, he definitely did. It's actually the only move to keep a very significant advantage. You can see it's -2 now in favor of black. And I guess this idea of pushing f4 is just a bit overzealous. Getting this g-file is going to be great for Magnus's attacking chances. So now white's on the back foot. They've got to move the queen. Again, this queen is now lined up with the king, which could have some tactical threats here. But we're going to see Magnus now close down the position. He doesn't want anything to do with this position opening up and letting those two bishops really show their power. So Fedoseev now drops his rook back. There's been a lot of moves here with this rook jumping back and forth. This is now because his pawn is in the way of the bishop, but still feels a little bit indecisive. And the next play here from Magnus, just the next few moves, is just beautiful. So he starts off by swinging the queen over to the side, attacking this weakness again. The bishop retreats. Then Magnus offers a trade of bishops, either activating the rook, maybe threatening that pawn again. White decides to decline, but now Magnus swings up, attacking this weakness. You can see he is relentless. Every move is coming with some kind of threat. And White just decides to run the king away and give up this pawn. But it is a passed h-pawn, and you're going to see Magnus just beautifully coordinate his pieces and just start marching this pawn up the board. So first, White brings his rook over here, but Magnus just starts to solidify everything. Doesn't want any potential maybe like bishop tactics here, maybe defending this pawn. Just shows that he's got some time to work with here. White moves his king further to safety here, and Magnus just plays again another slow move, bringing the rook up, defending this h6 pawn if the bishop ever wants to move. But now, White dropping their queen back, coordinating the rook and the queen, but allows Magnus to now infiltrate with that rook. Exactly what we were talking about as early as this g-file opened up. This rook is active. Now this rook is tied down defending the bishop. The queen comes back, trying to stay aggressive, but Magnus just counterattacks it. The queen is sent back. Now comes the bishop. Again, everything is just coordinating so beautifully here. This bishop is anchored by this pawn. It is looking tough for White. It's already -3 now. They get the g-file, which is something, but now Magnus clogs it up, fork on the queen and the bishop. I don't think Magnus is taking it, and he decides not to. This knight is causing a lot of problems here in White's territory. You can see bishop moves out of the way, rook comes back activating, the queen jumps forward, here comes the bishop, and here's a big mistake from Fedoseev, moves the rook over, which makes sense, threatening to capture the bishop if this rook ever moved, but there's a nice tactic here. Pause if you want a moment to spot it, and you know Magnus did. It is bishop takes c4 check. Now this rook is discovered on this bishop here, and this king can't stay defending it. Well, it can if it decides to drop back, but obviously then your bishop survives, and you've won a free pawn. So Magnus gets the pawn, gets this super active rook still. This queen is still trying to cause problems. Now potentially could infiltrate down to e7 here, but Magnus just swings his king over, just playing this very elegantly. And now Magnus is just back to coordinating his pieces. We saw how well that worked in the middle game for him. We have some shuffling, offering a rook trade, and he accepts. And now this is really tough. Again, this pawn is so far advanced. And we have the final sequence of the match. Fedoseev tries to run his king to safety, but it's no use. Magnus takes that pawn. We have one check, but Magnus just slides out of the way, no problem. There's no more checks. This king is still so safe. It's been a big theme of this match. This king just being completely safe in these ridiculously open positions. And now we have a nice checkmate here. We have the pawn moving forward, but Magnus first throws a check on c6. The king hides, seemingly potentially safe. This would be a repetition, but Magnus has this discovered check, pushing his b pawn. The only move is for the king to run down, and then he is checkmated. So in this spot, Fedoseev resigned. Thanks for watching the video. Remember to check out chessblueprints.com if you want to try out those puzzles. If you're just staying on YouTube and enjoyed this game, I've got a similar one from yesterday. It featured those kind of doubled pawns again. It's also a crazy opening, which is a lot of fun to learn. So check that out. It should be above me. And other than that, enjoy the rest of your day.